Everybody on UK Crime Book Club. Sorry about the slight delay. I'm here with Louise Candlish to talk about our latest book, The Heights. If you could open by giving us a short summary of the book, please, Louise.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So The Heights is a revenge noir, I would say. So it's a kind of thriller, kind of drama, but the main theme is revenge. And it has a very strong matriarchal figure, Ellen Saint, who is our narrator and the key character in the drama. And the book opens with Ellen, who is a lighting designer. She's visiting a client in a building in Shad Thames. And, you very quickly, you'll get the impression that, there's something quite nervy about her. There's something, a little bit awry or something, something's happened to her. And she looks out of the window of this building and she sees on the roof terrace of the building opposite a person who she recognizes, and she goes into paralysis, in total shock, because she has very good reason to think that that person is dead. And the question is, how can he possibly be there, standing in front of her, come back to life? And I'm not giving away any secrets, because all of this happens literally in the first scene. But she ends this first scene by saying, he can't possibly be alive. I know he's dead because I'm the one who killed him. So I very much hope that by the time you reach chapter 2, you're asking yourselves, why would this, apparently civilized, middle-aged, middle-class woman who's a successful lighting designer, how does she find herself in a situation where she's killed someone, and how can that person possibly have come back to life in front of her very eyes? What the hell is she going to do next?
Yeah, that's one hell of an opening line for the end of the first chapter. And what made you decide to do that as a premise? Because it's kind of doing a major twist on how, because somebody being alive that should be dead is normally how the book ends, not starts.
Yeah, no, I know. And I actually can't remember how that sort of opening came to me, because probably quite late in the process, before I started writing, I probably thought through the whole plot, because, we then have a backstory telling us what's happened in Ellen's family to lead to this moment of crisis in the present day. So normally I get the mechanics of the crime sorted and all my themes kind of, laid out, what I think I want to discuss, before I think too much about structure. So structurally, it's quite complicated, actually, I would say, because Ellen is, she is telling her story as part of a memoir. She's in a memoir writing workshop, and so that imposes a certain structure on the narrative right from the start, and so the scene that I just described is the way she introduces her story to her readers, and she has every reason to want to get her readers on board, and she adopts quite a intimate, almost confrontational sort of style, where she's challenging the reader and she's asking for the reader's sympathy in the actions she's taken in the past and in the present. So yeah, I'm not sure. I honestly can't tell you where that first line came from, or even the opening scene, because I certainly would have sorted out the backstory in my head before I figured out how I was going to weave in the present day. But yeah, it became perhaps more complicated than I'd initially thought, especially as I also have within the framework a Sunday Times interview with Ellen, in which you learn, again, right from the start, you learn that this book she has been writing, she's a first-time writer, so she's hugely successful by most people's standards. She's got a book deal, and the Sunday Times are interviewing her. And so interspersed with Ellen's book are these extracts from the Sunday Times interview with her. And you kind of get the sense, don't you think, Alex, that the reporters, perhaps not that keen on Ellen. She's got her criticisms of her, So that was quite fun to do, because I felt like that gave voice to some of the questions the reader might have about Ellen, and some, a bit of skepticism,
This is always good. Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm just curious as to what it felt like to actually be involved in the audiobook, because you're playing the journalist in the audiobook.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't imagine why they thought I would be a really nice, snide and horrible journalist, a sort of, a real meanie. I had, we've talked about this before, Alex, but I had done the audiobook for my quick read, The Skylight, which, for those who don't know, is the adult literacy project the reading agency do in coordination with Jojo Moyes, who's the main sponsor, and lots of best-selling authors do these quick reads that are about a fifth the length of a normal novel, and they're written in a sort of slightly simpler vocabulary and syntax for emerging readers. So the one I wrote was called The Skylight, and again, budgets are tight with that sort of charity project, and so I offered to do the audiobook myself. And I was quite scared about it, because I hadn't ever done an audio book before, not even a kind of, extract or anything. But I was just so surprised by how much I enjoyed it, and, loved it, actually. And I was thinking, oh my God, this could be a second career for me as an audio reader. But when I was then asked to do a little bit of The Heights, I realized just how lucky I'd been to be doing a quick read, because the sentences are shorter, they're simpler. It needed a lot less preparation. It flowed very naturally, because it's much closer to sort of spoken speech than a complicated adult novel is. And so I found it a bit harder doing my role in The Heights. I had to rehearse. I had to kind of mark up the texts. I knew where to where the emphasis should be. All of that stuff I didn't really have to do with the quick read, because it was just flowed so smoothly and simply because of the way it had been written. So it was a really, really interesting learning experience for me, and it's given me such respect for actors. I mean, I already had huge amounts of respect for actors and those who specialize in audiobooks. It's really exhausting to keep your concentration and deliver hour after hour after hour with a kind of consistent pace, consistent voice. And some actors will do multiple accents and sort of personalities within one book, as they sort of take every character as a completely different voice. I couldn't do that.
One of the most fascinating elements of reading your books is Penny, who has been playing one of the acting roles on up and coming TV, because she also narrated one of your earlier books, which I've just finished reading. So that's quite a...
Yeah, you mean Tuppence Middleton? Yeah, she. I saw your review. Thank you, Alex. You're so nice. I saw your lovely review of that. Yes, she narrated Those People, which was the book I wrote after Our House, and was about terrible neighbours. Neighbours from hell. And Tuppence is, the sweetest, most civilized and grounded and intelligent person. And so I found it just exhilarating to hear her doing all of these, awful characters. I went to the studio when she was doing it, actually, this was a few years ago, and met her. And she is definitely one of those actors who can just turn on the accents. So she was doing quite complicated bits of dialogue between 3 or 4 characters, and each of them would have absolutely a distinct accent and personality. And I just thought, oh my God, she's like some kind of genius accent person. She's such a good actress. And so when I heard the news that she would be playing Fee in Our House, and they're still filming now, they're about halfway through filming that for ITV. I just was so happy, because I've seen it firsthand how talented she is. And having visited the set and seen some of the rushes, I can tell you that she's just an amazing fee, and only does one accent the entire time.
I must admit, TV adaptations are different to audio, but I've always said, why don't they get the narrator for the audiobook or the actor from the TV to do the audiobook? Because they don't do that often enough.
No, they don't. It's I think it's all about, a TV star will have, very high profile, probably be quite expensive. I think availability to do audiobooks is probably, particularly this year, quite limited because filming started up, so there's more work. And you do get specialists as well. I think just because you're a kind of A-list star doesn't mean that you would be good at reading an audiobook. And a star of the screen has all those other qualities, the charisma and usually incredible looks, and familiarity with the audience. So I think they are two distinct things, but there's a lot of crossover, and certainly I was really lucky that a silver lining of the pandemic meant that Steve McIntosh, who's a big A-list actor, was available to agree to do the audiobook of The Other Passenger, because I had written that book with him in mind. I never imagined he would be able to do the audiobook. I assumed he'd be in LA or somewhere doing a big film or TV. But because all of the actors were grounded during 2020, some of them with home studios or just able to, audiobooks were able to be done because of the natural social distancing. You're on your own in a little studio. So it was just a dream come true when it turned out he could do it. So, there have been some lucky coincidences with audiobooks, but I've been thrilled with all of my audiobooks, and from big stars like him and Tuppence to names that people might not know, they're equally good. And of course, as with TV or screen, there'll be a director, there'll be a producer, it's a collaboration, and they prepare very thoroughly, and it's a pro industry, and it's growing as well. Audio is really growing. So that's been a thrill to be a part of. In my own small way, I am part of the Heights audiobook.
One of the things I really do enjoy about your books is the multiple perspective angle that you often take. Does that provide a harder writing challenge? And did you always do it like that, or was it one you developed later?
Well, they vary, actually. So The Other Passenger is one perspective. That's one narrator, Jamie, as voiced by Steve McIntosh, all the way through. So that's a single person narrator. Those people was I think did I do 3 or 4? I can't remember. I've often tried to do more and then been sort of talked out of it by my editors, who think that
other people
could be confusing. Yeah. So those people's probably the most. I've probably never done more than 4 voices, and our house is obviously 2, Fee and Bram. And then The Heights is mostly Ellen, but we've already spoken about this kind of the structure of the journalist. So you kind of get that every so often, but you also do get a second narrator in The Heights in the form of Ellen's ex-partner Lucas, Vic. Vic and Ellen have a son together, Lucas, before they split up, and Ellen is now married to Justin and has a daughter with him. So she's the mother of Lucas and Freya. And so initially, actually, it's an interesting question, because initially I planned it that Ellen would be the only narrator, because I really was on board with this idea that it was a book within a book, and we were reading her memoir. Would give it such a rich and intimate kind of voice. But after I started writing, it occurred to me quite quickly that how would anyone ever know what was the truth, or how she was, but was she viewing some of these episodes through rose tinted glasses, or was she exaggerating others? Because it's just a version of events, isn't it? We all know this, this idea of my truth. And so I thought, how am I going to do this? A little bit of skepticism on the part of the Sunday Times journalists might not be enough to fully explain what really happened. So I decided to bring in Vic as a co-narrator. And I'm really glad I did, because, again, is he to be believed fully? Some people might not find him any more compelling a narrator than Ellen, or less so. But at least you get two versions of events, and then you can draw your own conclusions. So yeah, I guess I've just mixed and matched. I often plan a book as almost like a reaction to the one before. So if I've done something in The Other Passenger, that was one strong male voice, and so I felt like I wanted to do a female voice. I wanted to do more than one voice, and there are similarities in terms of the structure, taking you back and forth in time, but in terms of the voices, I was just ready to do something different. So and then my next book, I go back to a male narrator. So it really is just what I fancy doing after that, the year long of experience of being in someone's head. Whose head do I want to get into next? But I think a lot of, in terms of having several narrators, several points of view, a lot of authors enjoy that, because if you get stuck, or if you're not quite sure what's going to happen next in one strand, you can get a fresh start the next day by going to one of the other characters, and you can often loosen your plot knots that way, and just keep reinvigorating the story with fresh energy, because it's a different perspective. So when you go for just one narrator, you have to really work hard at keeping the reader interested in that one person's point of view.
What do you like to focus on? Do you prefer male narration or female? Because they're very different in tone, aren't they? And this was very clear in The Heights.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of my books, you've had what would appear to be a neurotic woman matched with a sort of cooler and sort of slightly more sardonic male, and on the surface, the man's point of view is perhaps more attractive. But what I like to do is create puzzles where you've got to figure out what's really the truth here. And certainly in The Heights, Ellen wears it all on her sleeve. She is an overprotective mum. She is neurotic. She has a number of phobias, and she has a tendency to overreact, shall we say. And Vic doesn't seem to have those things. He seems to be much more level-headed. He seems to be more like someone that we could relate to. But actually, the more I talk to readers about this book, the more people sort of almost come out and say, oh, I sympathized with Ellen, actually, because I feel quite overprotective sometimes with my kids. And what happens to her and her reaction is, I suspect that might be how I would react at first. So I feel quite vindicated, actually, because at first I thought, oh, people won't like Ellen because she's got these crazy feelings. But actually, maybe she's more sympathetic than I thought. And maybe, it's a good idea to take what Vic says with a pinch of salt as well, because he's certainly not, he's a counterpoint to her, but that doesn't mean he's a faultless individual who hasn't got his own agenda and hasn't made his own mistakes. They've just got different styles, I think.
I'd say you've got the art of the dark character down to
Well, they're the ones I'm interested in. I mean, I earlier on in my career, when I was more likely to try and please people, I was often asked to make my characters more likable and more sympathetic, and I just found it quite hard to do. I'm not sure if I actually achieved it. Maybe I even made them, sort of less sincere by doing something that didn't feel natural to me, because the stories that I'm interested in telling sort of involve either bad behavior, if not outright crime. And lately, obviously, they do involve crime. But throughout my books, even before they were overtly crime books, people were behaving in a very misguided way. That ethically, there was a lot of dodgy stuff. And, I was attracted to characters making mistakes and having crazy feelings and acting on them. So the idea of sort of imposing a kind of likability on that sort of character is, harder to achieve than it sounds. And so these days I just create characters that feel real, and I don't mind whether they're likable or not, because the books that I love tend to have dislikable characters.
Well,
but yeah, the dark is the word. The dark characters, they're the ones I'm drawn to as a reader, and I think they're the ones that I just naturally create. So I've obviously just got a dark side, and this is how I'm expressing it.
well, now that I've read a third of your list, I can say that the dark characters do have redeeming features, and the shells. And the best thing I like about it is waiting for the redeeming feature to come.
I'm glad you have faith that it will emerge eventually.
Yeah.
It should do, because I would say that I have equal compassion for the criminals and the victims in my books. And it might interest readers of Our House to know that the working title for that was The Victim. And what I was interested in that book was seeing if I could challenge readers sort of perceptions of who the victim was, because it's, on the surface, it's Fee. She's had her house stolen from her. She's a victim of crime. She's also a victim of infidelity, and many other things, actually. But what I was interested in exploring was whether or not you could also think of Bram as a victim. And so, I really do approach criminals and victims with the same sort of sense of fairness, I think, which you can do. If I was a lawyer or a judge or a member of the jury, I couldn't really do that. But as a novelist, you can sit on the fence, and you can ask questions that you can't really in any other format, I think.
What do you think it was about Our House that? Because I described that in one of my reviews as your breakout book. I don't know whether you would agree with that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was. I mean, I actually had a couple of hits before. Since I Don't Have You, an early book of mine, which was about a bereaved mother who leaves her life and goes to live in Greece. My early books tended to have a sort of travel backdrop. That actually, probably is my biggest weekly sale in terms of print books ever. But it wasn't really sort of known. It was a kind of sleeper hit that, people who read it loved it, but it wasn't zeitgeisty in any way. It was just a successful book. So Our House was the first one where, there were articles written about it, and, people were giving it a label and saying that it was part of a, kind of new trend, property noir. And so, it was definitely my breakout book. And it was, it's no coincidence that it was devised out of contract, because it's quite a quite unusual book. It was, very original crime, I think, and none of us had read about, house theft before in a crime book, and the structure was immensely complicated, and the kind of thing that editors might try and kind of talk you down from the brink of that kind of complex plot. But because I was out of contract, I could just do what I liked. And so I just thought, well, I'll start writing it, because I was, I've said before that I was on the verge of giving up at that point, because I'd written a couple of books that I really was proud of, and they just had sort of sunk, really. That's The Swimming Pool and Sudden Departure of the Frasers. And so, I knew that I would be leaving that publisher, and I wasn't really sure if I would continue, because when you reach maybe 10, 12 books and nothing's really happened, I think it's fair enough to say I've given it a good go, and maybe there's other things I could do, and within writing or outside of writing. And but then I had this idea for our house, and it was just so obvious instantly that it was new and different that I had to write it. And I wasn't entirely sure how people would respond, but they did respond as I hoped, which was to see that this was quite this was a new twist on domestic noir. And so, it was definitely the right book to break out, I think.
Yeah, I would say that you've got a talent for the unusual kind of twist. But you, in an earlier interview, you said not all your books had twists in them. So how did you decide to develop that style, and why do you think that's worked for you when the linear method didn't?
Well, I think I think it's a very much trend driven. I think my earlier books, you have to remember, were in the noughties. So my first book came out in 2005. People didn't really talk about twists then. It wasn't a thing. It's a relatively recent thing. And if a book did have a twist, it would probably wasn't even called a twist. But yes, that whole trend for twists happened a few years later. So first of all, a twist wasn't demanded. It wouldn't have occurred to an editor to take your book and say, it'll be really good if there was a twist at the end that, pulled the rug on all of this. That just wasn't a part of the process. It wasn't really a thing, and readers weren't expecting it either. So I just told the story as I found it, and ended it as I thought appropriate. I would often have revelations, so something like Other People's Secrets, which is set in the Italian lakes and involves two families in neighbouring properties on holiday, and their lives, they mix and start to have these sort of relationships with each other. That has a series of revelations, but they wouldn't have been called twists because that wasn't the language being used. And actually I wouldn't call them twists even now, because they were more just reveals. But yeah, I think the first book where it had a twist and no one even mentioned that it had a twist, even though it was easily my best twist ever, which was the disappearance of Emily Marr. But again, because it sort of slightly predated, that sort of discussion, it kind of went under the radar. So hopefully people who've enjoyed, my more recent books might think about going back and reading The Disappearance of Emily Marr, because I think that's got a good twist. But now I think that, I'm one of the authors who's sort of known for twists and surprises. And so I do feel a pressure to supply that. Which doesn't mean that I'll contrive it if it doesn't work. I'd rather just explain up front, this is going to be a book without a twist. But so far I hope I've found ways to surprise, and it might not be at the end either. Our house became known for everything changing in the last line, but I'm not sure I'll be able to do that again. That was a very natural sort of way of ending that book, and I saw it as irony rather than a twist. But yeah, sometimes there might be something that changes everything halfway through, or a bit later, and by the end you might just have a few little evil moments in an epilogue or in a final chapter, but not something that changes your whole perception of the book.
I must admit, when you do that and you have to go back and go, this is not just a twist that's turned up and the last bit, and you've got to go back and find it.
That's great, isn't it? When you read a book where that happens and you think, hang on a minute, I need to, because you can't believe that it can possibly be the case, and you have to go back and look at all of those incidents where hang on a minute, surely we knew then, and then you go back and you realize actually the author has covered all of his or her tracks, and it's been seamlessly done, and it's really feels really clever and naughty, and I love reading those as well. Got something like Gone Girl obviously did that brilliantly.
I mean, in The Other Passenger, I must admit, I could tell where the clues were, but it was just the way you hid them. And I thought, yes, this could possibly be a hint to what might happen.
Yeah, there's always clues. That's the thing I should say, is that if there is a big twist like in the other passenger, there will always be clues, and there will always be readers who guess immediately. And for me, that's all part of the fun of the fair. I love seeing people's reactions, and I love it when people guess, and I also love it when they don't guess. Because every reader's experience is completely personal and unique, and so trends will emerge. There'll be a book where no one guessed except for a couple of super clever people, or there might be one where everyone guessed, but you'll always have clues. And I think I'm quite liberal in the way in sprinkling them. I think there are quite a few clues, but you have to be looking for clues. And most of us just want to read a book and take it at face value. And in a way, that's what I'm sort of learning about crime readers, is that readers are detectives, and they are looking for clues. And if you do have the good fortune to become well known for a certain kind of book, to be well known at all as a writer, then they're going to pick up a book from me, and they're going to expect that there'll be some surprises. So when you're expecting a surprise, you're looking for clues. So that's, in a way, that was why Our House was easier, because hardly anyone had heard of me. They didn't know what to expect. And, so it was easier for me to pull off some of those tricks. But now I know I'm dealing with, incredibly experienced detectives as readers.
Now that people...
I can only disappoint now.
Yeah. Now that people are looking for clues, would you say that you have had a book that you've enjoyed the clues and where you put them? Because I like the way you include the police as part of the narrative in the two of the 5 books I've read. Because in the other people, there's a police reports as the narrative, as the start of the...
Yeah, that's right. Those people, they each of the I'm trying to remember now, because it's a couple of years. Each of the chapters begins with an excerpt from their police statements or interviews, doesn't it? Yeah. No, I do like using the police. I'm not I'm not a procedural writer, and so in a way I try and limit my my police scenes. And because I want them to be authentic, but at the same time, I'm not looking to have a detective as the narrator. I like to write from the point of view of the criminal, or the innocent person who's haplessly involved in some crime or misdemeanor. So any detectives or any police officers will be seen through the eyes of people who don't necessarily know the system back to front. So there won't be all the police vocabulary, or they won't have an understanding of the process. They're more like you and I. If we went out and witnessed a terrible accident, we wouldn't immediately know exactly what the process would be. So I like to retain that sense of I'm out of my depth, what's happening officially in my books. But equally, it's crime, and there will be detectives. So, there were detectives in Our House as well. And trying to think if there were any detectives in. There may have been the occasional call or cameo by police in earlier novels as well. But yeah, The Other Passenger, they're kind of, these two detectives are really central characters, and I love the way they interact with Jamie when they're interviewing him, and and he thinks he's got the measure of them as well, and they're these 3 guys together. And those scenes were really good fun to write. And I was talking earlier about using multiple viewpoints to kind of almost bring variety to your writing experience, and I got that with those police scenes. I would, if I was a bit stuck or feeling my interest waning, I would go back to those police scenes or write one of those, because I found them really good fun to write. And just trying to get it right so that the reader would feel as Jamie did.
Oh, it definitely worked, because good use for aid memoir with the police scenes. I would have said. What was it about the normal member of the public which draws you to it as a protagonist over any other kind of protagonist you could have gone for? Because there's loads in the possible crime genre that you could have chosen.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I should point out that I haven't, my characters aren't, they might commit crimes, but they're not serial killers, or they're not there's not really malice aforethought usually with my narrators. It's much more accidental. They're sort of accidental criminals often. I think I find it very natural to portray that, because that's who I am and that's who readers are. We're mostly law-abiding citizens. We're reading crime fiction because it's it's incredibly entertaining and twisty, but it's also a way of experiencing some of those, some of our fears without having to actually experience it in person. So you can see what would happen in the Heights. You can see what would happen if you let rip those crazy feelings you might have when you're parenting, the rivalries, the catastrophizing, your heart beating in sync with your child, trying to just sort of control their happiness and protect them from mistakes and anything bad happening. And I think that most of us know that we must allow children to grow up and become independent and make their own mistakes, but it's tempting to feel that you can protect them more than you can. And so in the Heights, you see what happens if someone does not rein in those natural instincts. And I do think that's what my books and lots of domestic noir is about. It's about someone we can relate to who has taken things too far, or has found themselves, in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they're trying to navigate the nightmare that they've landed in. And to me, that's more appealing to write. That's not to say I don't like reading police procedurals or other kinds of crime fiction, but I do like writing from the point of view of someone who I think we can all relate to, and it really is that kind of, oh my God, that could be me kind of feeling. I'm not asking you to completely step in someone else's shoes. They sort of look a lot like your shoes already. And I find that really interesting.
And the fear element is quite interesting, you just mentioned, because that's a key element within the Heights, isn't it? What is it that is an important plot or important element of your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay to say that Ellen has a fear of heights, and she is not my first main character to have a phobia. I'm completely fascinated by phobias, which is of course irrational fear, which is very different from rational fear, and and links into what I was saying about people who are their reactions to things are a little bit awry. It's it's not quite right, and so you find that with Ellen. She's got a phobia of heights. It's actually a condition called high place phenomenon, which I have myself. Which is it's not vertigo as we know it in the movie. It's when you have the compulsion to jump or sort of let yourself fall from a high place that's a sort of open space. So it might be a balcony or a ledge or a roof terrace in the case of the Heights, or it might be the top of a lighthouse, or it might even be when you're on a bridge or an aqueduct, or any of those kind of high places where you could physically fall or jump. if you have these sort of intrusive thoughts that tell you that, they're like, oh my God, a split second and you could be over the edge. It's that kind of feeling. And I have that myself, and lots of people do have it. So she's got this. But when someone has that kind of anxiety or phobia, it means that they tend to react to situations in a different way from the normal people, and they tend to develop safety behaviors to avoid certain situations. So it's just automatically, it just gives you so much scope with a character if they've got this kind of this terrible fear directing everything they do. And in our house, Bram has a fear of being imprisoned, and it has a direct bearing on how the nightmare unfolds, because he will do anything to avoid being imprisoned. And in The Other Passenger, of course, Jamie is claustrophobic, and he's had a terrible incident on the tube, which has led to him not being able to continue in his job because he can't get to work any other way. So it has a huge impact on his life, and it leads him into the situation that he finds himself in the book. So I like using fear and phobia to sort of lead characters out of their lane and into a less familiar zone.
Boat taxi for The Other Passengers, quite an interesting premise angle. Have you ever been on a boat taxi yourself?
Yeah, I mean, they're ferries, really. They're not like glamorous, boat taxis in Venice or somewhere like that. On the Thames, they are catamarans, which just make them sound like you're cruising around the Caribbean, but they're really ferries. I went on the Thames Clippers on the Thames multiple times when I was researching The Other Passenger. It was really at the heart of the book, and at one point I did plan a murder on the boat, and I couldn't quite make it work in terms of realism, because there are cameras everywhere on boats, and the staff are extremely good, and I just couldn't quite make it work. But it was right there from the beginning. The boat was going to be at the heart of the plot, and create the mood as well, which I think it does. And it was my first book that was set in central London, and so in a way, even though it's a really sinister book with lots of horrible characters, it felt a bit like a love letter to London, and sort of a bit of a tribute to the city where I live. And I loved writing about the river so much that the Heights returns to the river, and this is where this character Kieran Watts, who is, I guess, the baddie, if we could call him that, he lives in Shad Thames, a lovely old Victorian warehouse district near Tower Bridge, for those who don't know it, right on the water. There's a little inlet called St Saviour's Wharf, and that's where he lives. And so it was, that came out of my my research for The Other Passenger. I just loved depicting the river, and noticed all of these little areas when I was cruising up and down on the Thames Clipper that I then wanted to develop a bit in the Heights.
I do love your description of the locations. The houses in the books are what, for me, make your books unique, because the way you describe the locations is they are really key to the plot. Why
you
to do that?
I think it comes naturally. I mean, I am obsessed with property. I think I'm very typical of our times in that respect, and that's what our house grew out of, actually, was my kind of fascination with how property had become the defining obsession of our age. And having grown up in the 80s and 90s, no one really talked about property. I mean, I know I was younger and it wouldn't have been on my radar, but even so, I don't remember really seeing very much press about it. It was only when the house prices started to soar that it's become sort of so fundamental to everyone's life. Are you on the property ladder? Aren't you on the property ladder? How much equity have you got in your house? People making decisions based on their house rather than the people in it. And so that was, that's always been a big interest of mine. And I feel that, I'm just as bad as the next person, constantly on Rightmove. I mean, now I actually find, lots of the property sites incredibly useful for research. So the Modern House is one of my go-to sites if I'm, trying to put together an interior for someone in my mind. The swimming pool, they live in a sort of gorgeous 30s house. I guess they're my dream houses sometimes, and as with everything else, it's like a form of therapy. I can enjoy living in those houses on the page because I can't afford to buy them in real life, or some houses don't come on the market ever in your lifetime, and so you can only fantasize about what it's like to live in them. You can't actually experience it. So for me, it's just a fundamental interest for me, property, all different kinds, but mainly in London, and what it means to people. And status is, I'm really fascinated by status. I think it's absolutely behind all human behavior. We want to see how we rank alongside our neighbours, and you can do that explicitly or it can just be implicit. But I find it really fascinating in my own life, seeing how people regard property and interiors, and how it kind of places them above or below the next person. It's really, it's just to me, it's like, God, is this really what we're going to spend our precious lives doing? Ranking ourselves according to who's got the best house. But that's kind of what's been happening in the UK and other countries.
What is it about what's the best non-London location that you've not written about yet that you might want to write about?
Well, I've written quite a few other European locations. So I've written about Italy a couple of times. I've had a book in Paris, Greece, France a couple of times. The Ile de Ré I know really well, and 2 of my books have had scenes in the Ile de Ré. The Disappearance of Emily Mars set there. So maybe I need to go outside of Europe. Maybe the States. I'm really fascinated by that kind of Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard kind of vibe. But there are so many writers already doing that, and they know the culture and they know all of the little snobberies and the whole status structure there, which I would have to learn from scratch. So it is easier for me to write what I know. But maybe I could take some of my British characters and put them in another location. Let's see. I don't know. I do have a thing about islands. Quite a few of my books have been set on islands, including the Ile de Ré, but also Panarea in Sicily. My first book was set there. Santorini, I've set a book. So I do like islands. So maybe I need to discover another island or create one. And have everyone trapped there, like in Lucy Foley's guest list, which I loved.
It's quite interesting that you mentioned Lucy Foley's guest list, because that was one of your other Theaks' nominees for.
Yes, that's right. And you were a judge, weren't you?
I was. Yeah.
Thanks for not letting either of us win, Alex.
More than just me.
Oh no, I'm only joking. It was an incredible list, wasn't it? And I, like everyone, I absolutely loved Chris Whitaker's book that won. We Begin at the End is a fabulous book, so a worthy winner. But yeah, it was lovely to see the guest list on the list as well, because like Lucy, I'm very influenced by Agatha Christie, and it might not be apparent in my work in the way that it is in hers, but we are fellow fans, and I loved seeing the kind of she's like a millennial Agatha Christie, I think, to sort of update something like And Then There Were None. to a kind of nouveau riche wedding on an island and off the coast of west of Ireland. It's just brilliant. I love that book.
What would you say that you think about closed locations like islands that leads to you liking Christie and people like that so much?
Well, I think it does. You get that kind of natural atmosphere on an island. You get that sense of being cut off, even if communications haven't broken down, as they often have in novels set on islands. You're still, you're literally detached from the main part of life. And so I think that's what it is. It's that you're in a kind of microcosm. You can also, for us, in terms of sense of place, you can describe the whole thing as well. So you can really, kind of give readers a sense of the whole island, because it's small enough to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think all humans are attracted to islands, otherwise we wouldn't constantly be holidaying on them. I think it's that kind of the beauty of the sea and the amazing locations you get. There's the cliffs and the beaches, and somewhere like Santorini, where, since I don't have you, is set little houses carved out of the cliffs, and you've got ready-made atmosphere when you have locations like that. It's not, some drab suburb that we all know because that's where we live generally, or busy, dusty city. It's somewhere that feels quite exotic. So yeah, I think that we'll always love reading books set on islands.
When it comes to people that influence you, is there anybody modern that you would say that you've got to pick up their book?
Well, in terms of the writers who've influenced me, they're mostly dead now that Tom Wolfe has died as well. Margaret Atwood remains. She's a big influence. And in fact, I was reading her very first book, The Edible Woman, when I started writing my first book. So I always sort of, feel so grateful to her as an inspiration, as well as being one of my favorite authors to read. I feel like she directly influenced me starting to write. And Patricia Highsmith is one of my favorites, big favorite of mine. And in the last sort of year or so, I've really got into Barbara Vine, Ruth Rendell's psychological arm. In terms of my contemporaries, I love Rachel Cusk. I love Kate Atkinson, of course. And, I love Lucy. I love Lisa Jewell and Ruth Ware. And we're kind of, I guess, similar. Shari LaPena and Erin Kelly. All of the domestic queens. I enjoy reading them just as much as everyone else does. I do like a North American writer, actually. I love Curtis Sittenfeld. I read a lot out of my own genre because I feel I'm so easily influenced that I feel worried that I might kind of copy someone's style or voice or even plot if I'm reading a lot of psychological thrillers when I'm writing. I feel a bit concerned that I might unconsciously copy. So I tend to read classics when I'm writing, and then I'll kind of feast on contemporary stuff when I'm between writing books.
What do you do to relax when you're not reading or writing? Because we all have our own things we like to do in downtime.
Yeah, well, obviously I watch loads of TV, but I consider that absolutely tax deductible part of my job. I love TV and always have loved TV. But I love walking. I have a Labrador, and I try and go on at least one of his walks every day. But I would like to do some big achievement walks. One of my heroes is Art Garfunkel, and he's one of these crazy walkers who will walk across Europe. Or do these amazing treks. So I'd like to, when I'm perhaps semi-retired, I might do more walking. Tennis, we were talking about it, weren't we, before we started? I'm a really avid tennis fan, so I think I would be happy to just have a big screen with, you know, the US Open on, or Wimbledon, or, you know, even a minor tournament. I think I could just watch it for 8 hours a day if I was left to my own devices.
Oh, I can see you setting a book with a background to tennis, like London and all the
Yeah.
yeah.
I think I'd love to, but there's no way they would allow someone like me to you know, go behind the scenes, because they would know that it was going to be, you know, it's going to put a dark spin on, you know, what they obviously want to present as a wholesome world. So I would be amazed if I could get any access, and then without the access, I'm not sure how I could get the details right. And I would also have to realistically ask myself how many of my readers would be interested in a tennis-based story. So it might have to be something that, you know, is like a kind of a strand.
Yeah.
Perhaps I could have a character who's obsessed with tennis, rather than the plot being, you know, murder in the locker room. Or but you've given me an idea, Alex. Thank you. I'm gonna let that mull.
Yeah. Well, there's enough short stories out there, anthologies and things. You could put one in there.
That's true. Oh, yes, that's true. I could do a tennis short story, couldn't I? Just to sort of, I could test the waters that way. And if there's an incredible response, then I could think about a whole novel and see what my publishers say.
What do you think we haven't discussed yet that you'd like to tell people, as we've only got a couple of minutes left?
I know, it's gone so quickly, hasn't it? Yeah. Nothing. You know, your questions have been amazing, and we've covered quite a bit of the heights. I'm glad that we talked about high place phenomenon, because that's one of my big things, and that's a big theme in the book. You know, sort of the fear of heights. And but not just heights, but the fear of losing control, because that's what high place phenomenon is really. It's that fear of the kind of rogue thought dictating what you do, and that's, you know, it's much more about just heights for the character of Ellen. But yeah, I'd love to just say thank you to everyone for reading my books, and for, you know, taking the time to watch this. And I'm always available to answer questions about my books. I might not respond immediately, but you know, if you contact me through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, I'll can usually respond.
Yeah. Well, we're saying just before the interview that you just joined the group, so I know there's a few comments down the side, but
oh yes, I've tried not to be distracted by those. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll pop online tomorrow morning and have a look at people's comments and answer any questions there, and I'll do that first thing.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this evening, and I'm sure I'll enjoy your next book as much as I've enjoyed the earlier ones. And I'll have to go back and read some of your earlier ones.
Yeah, try Emily Marr.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alex, for your support generally. You've been such a fantastic supporter, and to have two reviews on your blog right now on the homepage, I'm honoured.
Yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of your evening. And
yes, you too.
I'll see you in the group soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex.
No problem.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.